Hey, everybody. Today we are joined by someone whose work you have most definitely heard. Natalie Robehmed is an award-winning journalist and executive producer at Campside Media. She's the writer behind WeCrashed, the chart-topping investigation into WeWork that became the hit Apple TV Plus series. And she has spent her career unpacking what power looks like when it goes off the rail. We're here to talk about her newest project, Allison After NXIVM, a 7-episode deep investigation into one of the most infamous cult stories of our time, but this time told through the lens most people have never heard: the life, the psychology, and the aftermath of actress Allison Mack. It goes beyond the headlines, the details, and asks the harder questions that we've been asking since we first covered this back in 2019. We are so honored to have you here today, Natalie. Welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. We did cover this way back in 2019. It was one of the earlier episodes that we ever did, and then we revisited it, and it's a cult that sticks with me and I think about quite often. And we reference on the show specifically Allison's kind of role and how it evolved and what we think about that.
Most definitely. What kind of drew you to this topic and stories about power, influence, and ambition and things? People like Keith Raniere that can make someone's life turn upside down.
Yeah, I mean, this is the stuff that makes the world go round. And we're all involved in various power dynamics and various relationships. Hopefully none as sinister as the ones that Keith Raniere had. But, you know, this is really the stuff of life, dealing with rich, powerful people. And I've always been interested in stories about those types of people. I think for this story in particular, as it pertains to Allison Mack and Keith Raniere and Allison's role in NXIVM, I was really interested in it because it wasn't clear cut. You know, it's not cut and dry. Allison is somebody who, as the podcast investigates, like, both was a victim and victimized others. And I think that nuance and that complexity is really what drew me to it.
Oh, definitely. I appreciated your honesty saying at the beginning when you were presented with this kind of, I don't know that I want to be part of this redemption story.
Yeah.
But Christy and I've struggled with the line of victim versus enforcer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's been really interesting having this project come out, and I think people who listen to it, and I really would encourage everyone to go listen to Allison After NXIVM.
It's great. Please do.
Yes.
Thank you. I think those who go listen to it really understand that that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to hold both and interrogate that, because I think we have this sense and this knowledge in our society that very often people who end up hurting other people have been hurt and damaged themselves. And there's something in your history that not allows, but sets you up in many ways to go ahead and perpetrate that abuse, which is like very uncomfortable and very complicated and also not an excuse, you know? Mm-hmm. So I think, but it has been very interesting seeing some sort of comments online and just some pushback of people feeling like, oh, you know, you've given her a platform. And
yeah,
I hear that and I understand that, because I never want to take away from the victims, but Allison's victims in particular. But at the same time, like, this is somebody who served her time and was a victim in and of herself. So if we can understand better how somebody was a victim and then made that step to victimize others, hopefully we can, like, I don't know, prevent that from happening again, or know what to watch out for, both within ourselves and within other people.
Was that part of the reason that you felt like Allison's post-NXIVM chapter was kind of, this was the right time to tell that story?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the question of, I think Allison is going to be unpacking her time in NXIVM, like, for the rest of her life, whether she's doing it publicly or whether it's just in session with her therapist. You know, it's probably something she's going to be working through forever. And, you know, her realizations about it might be different in 5 years and 10 years. I think this story came to me in part because of my co-executive producer on this project, Vanessa Gregoriadis, who has covered NXIVM extensively and wrote one of the first big stories about NXIVM for the New York Times Magazine back in 2018. And she interviewed Keith Raniere and Claire Bronfman and Allison Mack back in the day. But, you know, I think with this, I don't know. I mean, I think Allison might feel differently about it in the future, but there was a sense to me that she was far enough out that she could talk about it and reflect on it, but it wasn't so far in the rearview mirror that it wasn't still fresh, you know?
Yeah.
And I thought that was important.
Yeah, she was able to recall some details, and it almost sounded like when you were interviewing her, some of the details were coming back to her that she was like, oh, and then we did this. Oh, yes. And almost in disbelief at herself. And there were so many elements to the story that just were not in mainstream coverage previously, because I think there was this kind of like victimization or there was a labeling of her as period, a perpetrator, full stop. And we struggled in our early coverage of going, yes, that she did these horrible things, but people don't do that in a vacuum. And she wasn't doing that before she ever met these people. So what stories or kind of dynamics did you uncover that you think mainstream media missed, whether intentionally or unintentionally?
Yeah, I really appreciate your perspective and that nuance that you brought to even just the early introduction, because a lot of people weren't seeing that. But I think you're exactly right that from the outside, it really just seemed as though Allison Mack was super high up. She was one of the top lieutenants, and she was just doing Keith's bidding, but like getting off on it herself. And of course, it was not as clear cut as that. And I think one thing I did not know before going into the story and working on this podcast was the level of sexual coercion at play within the cult. Like, I think there was this sort of salacious idea that like Keith was quote unquote polyamorous is how he framed it, but that all of these women were just willingly engaging in sexual activity with him. And this is really hard to talk about and really uncomfortable, but like, I think Allison personally has come to a place where she's rethinking whether that was consenting or not. Yeah. Because ultimately, like, she was incredibly coerced. Like her sexual relationship with Keith did not begin until 9 years into her time in NXIVM around 2015. And so this was a key piece to me that, while very disturbing to hear about and for Allison to speak about, I think was very important to understand. Like, basically, how did Allison's sexual relationship with Keith begin? And the way that it began was she was on a walk with another woman, and that woman kind of said to her, what's up? How are you doing? And Allison was like, I'm doing okay, but I feel like I have some blocks around my sexuality, around my sex life. Like, I can't get close to people. I get to a certain level of closeness, I can't get further. And, I think that there are some things that happened to me when I was a child that weren't okay in sort of a sexual arena. And, which is, I'm talking about it very quickly, but which is like just upsetting in and of itself, Yeah. And so that woman suggested to Allison that she speak to Keith about it because, like, and Allison was like, why would I do that? That's weird. Like, he's my business partner, because they were working on this curriculum. That's what they called these different programs. But the Source, which was like this actors program to try and get actors into NXIVM, basically. And so then Allison was like, okay. And so after that, she did go and talk to Keith, and she told him, I'm feeling some blocks around my sexuality and in my relationships. And Keith sort of said, like, okay, well, I can help you with that. But essentially, like, because it's a practical physical problem, it needs to have like a practical or a physical solution. Yeah. Which again was like it came from the backdrop of, this was built into NXIVM philosophy, which is something that I found so insidious, that a lot of Keith's perversions were set up via a lot of the education that had been done. So it was just normalized. Like in NXIVM, they had this thought that it was like, okay, you could read a book about skiing, but you won't know how to ski until you actually do it. And so how that pertained to Allison and Keith's sexual relationship was that it was framed as, okay, well, it has to be physical in order to resolve this. And it was framed as energy work, as like tantric, and that he was sort of talking her through it as it was happening, and also debriefing with her afterwards to help her or to coerce her into cataloging the experience into a certain way. And again, there's this other very core part of NXIVM that I think is so important, and that I do see in other cults as well, is this idea in NXIVM that if you were uncomfortable, that meant that you were growing. And so if something doesn't feel right, which was, Allison says it felt, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
Okay. It felt fucking weird. Like after having sex, she was like, this is fucking weird. And she went and talked to the other woman again. And the woman was like, well, it's Keith's just trying to help. Like, he's whatever. And, psychologically and philosophically, the backdrop was if you feel uncomfortable, that means that you're growing. So you need to keep pushing past these growth edges, in quotes, to really get to be your most actualized self. And of course, the real problem begins, the real criminal elements begin, and the most abusive elements begin when Allison starts pushing other people to go past their own edges. And
there were a lot of shades of Twin Flames universe, which we've also covered, of that your boundaries are really just something that we're trying to push past them for your own good. And I appreciate you bringing up that means it's not necessarily consensual, right? Because it's being put forth as therapy and not intimate relations, which is what it is.
No.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Christy.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's total gaslighting and just
100%.
Using someone's vulnerabilities against them.
Totally. But I think what's really insidious about it, and what I've been thinking about a lot, is that like so many of these cults, like part of it is always rooted in one grain of truth. Like there actually is something to you in yourself pushing yourself, whether it's at the gym, going up to a different weight class to like see if you can do it, or like, I don't know, I'm in my 30s, everybody's suddenly running marathons to like see if they can. And like, it's like there is something amazing about pushing yourselves and discovering you can do things you didn't know you can do. But for me, I think when I look at it, I'm like, the difference comes when it's coming actually internally and not from not from somebody else telling you. But I mean, that's the like mind meld spaghetti mess of NXIVM, that it's like they're a tiny element. You can see how they got there you can see one tiny grain of truth, but it gets so distorted and so manipulated and so used against you.
And especially you recognize like, oh, he stole this from someone. Like the truth is just,
That's what I was going to say. We've seen this in pretty much every cult we've covered. There is a grain of truth where it all blossoms from, but then that quickly gets intertwined with coercion, manipulation, abuse. But the victims still remember that grain of truth, and the perpetrator is still, bringing it back to that every time. Well, you're uncomfortable, so that means this is working. You're growing. So it just keeps feeding the beast over and over. And I think they get so ingratiated and ingrained in it so quickly that it's just, you're in over your head before you realize what's really happened.
100%. And I think it's really important to talk about this part of it, because I think a lot of people look at cults and like look at these cult stories and sort of think like, how did these people get here? Like, how did they, like, I would never do that. I would never do something as horrible as that. And of course, none of us want to think that we would, but I think it's important to like understand the mechanisms that are put in place in these groups that allow for and kind of set up structures in which people do horrible things. Because as you said earlier, it's not in a vacuum, right? Like there's other things going on, and there's like other mental frameworks being set up that cause these terrible things to occur.
Yeah. And I loved Vanessa's statement in episode 4 after she met Keith in Mexico. And she said, it's hard to explain how underwhelming it was to meet him after such a buildup. And she said he looked like, quote, just your average car salesman. So what factors do you think that would allow somebody so mediocre, so unattractive, who spewed such nonsense?
So hairy.
And so schlubbish, we kept calling him schlubby, but to wield this like intense power over others, was it like the external legitimization from having like Nancy and other women already in it? Like the like videos that they made it look like it was a legitimate organization, the sashes. I mean, it's just every time we're like, him?
Yeah.
That guy?
No, totally. And it's like, it's so like funny because that's exactly right. That's like the reaction everybody had to seeing him in The Vow, when you kind of see him in this volleyball clothes with his like greasy gray hair and the sweatbands and whatever. You're like, this loser. Yeah. Like it's just this like, what? But I think you're really right to bring up, a lot of people, we take cues from how other people treat somebody. Yeah. So within NXIVM, and I actually think about the time when Allison first met Keith, which was on the volleyball court. I mean, we take our cues from other people. If somebody is treating this person with reverence and as important and as coming to sit down at their feet to listen to them, then you are sort of like, oh, holy shit, like this person's an important person. I have to treat them like that. But I will say, you know, I've never spoken to Keith myself. I've never interviewed him myself. But from the people that I have talked to, including Allison Mack, including Lauren Salzman, who is Nancy Salzman's daughter and spent like more than 20 years in NXIVM, I think that Keith was incredibly adept at finding somebody's greatest weakness, identifying it, and then using that against them. So in the case of Allison, very early on, I think at a first or second workshop, Keith and Nancy basically told her, you know what? You're performative. You're a narcissist, which for somebody who grew up as a child actor and like had always been in competition with other women, you know, at various auditions at 12 years old and looking around and being like, okay, am I prettier than her? Oh, I heard she's really good. Blah, blah, blah. And then always worried about whether she was performing a version of self to get people to like her. He hit on her greatest weakness and her psychological weakness, where she was like, oh shit, like, okay, then I am a narcissist if Keith says this and I need to fix myself. And then Keith represented NXIVM as the panacea, as the thing that was going to solve everything. And it's like, all right, you need to come here to fix yourself, to fix the ways that you can't have deep relationships with people, to fix the ways in which of course would then later become a part of his sexual story with her. And yeah, to fix all the ways in which you're broken. And I think he was very, very good at figuring out each person's mental Achilles heel and then flipping that. You know,
we always say on the show, if somebody gets scammed, that the victim shouldn't feel bad because the scammer is like a snake and snakes bite. And like, right. We were always like, you got snake bit. That's Christy and I say that on the show, because when people write in having gone through situations like this, you don't want them to feel, I got duped by this loser. It's like, I got duped by a really good liar and a scammer who just looks like a loser used car salesman. You know, it's just like
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've worked on, I worked on another podcast called Catch Me If You Can that was like about a scammer like this who was so, again, like in like modern parlance, like so mid, you know, like just looked so unassuming. But I actually think like there's part of that that maybe even helps psychologically, where you sort of think like, okay, this person couldn't possibly be threatening. Like
they're too ugly.
They're just so normal seeming. And yet it's like the, wolf in sheep's clothing kind of thing. And I don't know. Yeah, I feel the exact same way. Like I have a lot of, I really have so much empathy for people who find themselves like the victims of scams or find themselves targeted. There's often, or in cults, like there's often so much shame of like, fuck, how was I so stupid? How could this happen to me? How was I taken in? And, I think in all my reporting on these subjects, both on NXIVM and other stories, I just feel like to say it without sounding like fear-mongering, like it could kind of happen to all of us. Yeah. Even if we don't think it could, like if we met the wrong person at the wrong time when we were uniquely vulnerable, it could. And like, I say that not to scare people, but just to like have empathy and like have eyes open to it, because I think it's uncomfortable. Like we want to think we'd be the cult leader, but I'm like, I don't know, girl. Like, a lot more of us would be the follower than we'd like to admit, I think.
That there is so much shame, like you said, in stories we hear from people that have come out of cults or been scammed and financially or whatever. And people do, it is easy, keyboard warriors, to be like, well, that's stupid. I would never do that. They prey on that one thing that imagine your most vulnerable weakness. It keeps you up at night. That is like the thing you think worst about yourself. Yeah. And then you have someone saying that, oh, I can fix that.
Exactly.
Who wouldn't be like, well, I'll try it, and then it just snowballs from there. But I mean, and that's the cult leader. If they get you in the door, they know they've kind of got you and they can get their claws into you.
Exactly.
Yeah. I liked that you explored how the external world was processing her, because I feel like that gives a mirror to people, like Christy said, keyboard warriors who might say like, she's just trying to, be famous again or whatever. And I think your show makes clear that she is not, that she is pursuing a career that is retributive to her, as well as something that she clearly was already interested in. You know, at the end of the day, the NXIVM scam was this will fix you. And she seems like she wants to help people. But in the episode where you described her awaiting sentencing in school and how one student used her as fodder for a TikTok skit and other students went and complained about her, and just sort of this external vision of her internal processing, you know, how did those moments to you kind of reveal about how the outside world was ready for her then, and now having completed her sentence, do you think that there has maybe been a shift now?
You know, I think it's really interesting. And I think because I see both sides of it, both with the instance that you were talking about when Allison was in school and like now as well, you know, like so Allison, when she was on house arrest before she went to prison, she started she started going to Long Beach Community College, and then she transferred to Berkeley, and she wanted to be a women's and gender studies major, which I have to be so honest, like when she told, I was like Allison, how do you not get that this is going to come across as bad? Like, how are you this like naive, or like naive is the kind read, like delusional is the like more unkind read. Like, how do you not get this? And it feels almost like hubristic or something. But like, at least in my experience of her, Allison moves through the world with like a very like wide-eyed naivete, and it's like almost jarring. Like I, as like a pretty cynical person, I think, you know, I still enjoy light and cynical, rainbows, but like I'm a journalist. Like I'm pretty cynical generally. And I'm, you know, looking at, so I completely understand these students being like, I don't want her in my class. Like this doesn't feel safe to me. But then I also see the other side of it, which is like, okay, well, if you want a rigorous academic experience, like, wouldn't you want to be confronted by somebody who maybe holds opposing views? But then that like punctures the idea of campus or an intimate seminar as a safe place. So like, I really see all of the sides. And I think that's part of what like so drew me to this, because it's like, it's not like cut and dry. It's not like Allison immediately realized all the things that she'd done wrong and then never made any mistakes again. Like she's like a flawed person, as we all are, and like continues to take steps that may be missteps, you know, throughout. And so, you know, I think it's really, it's interesting to me to see how, and I'm interested to see how people continue to kind of respond to her throughout her life, you know, like, as you said, so since she ended up graduating with a degree in psychology from Berkeley, and then she's now pursuing a master's in social work, and she's like working with 2 arts nonprofits to kind of bring the arts into prisons. But I mean, I can see all the reads of that. Like, is she being a white savior? Is she being like a real theater kid? Or is this like genuine? But then at the same time, it's like, what do you want her to do? Like, she like, is she supposed to just like roll over and die? Like, I don't, you know, like
become a hermit.
Disappear.
Right. Like, what do we do? Like, somebody needs to be working with incarcerated peoples and helping them. So like, why not somebody who's done time and has, you know what I mean? Like, again, I can see all the nuances of it. And this is
That's a good journalist.
Thank you.
Well, it makes a good podcast series for sure. Absolutely.
No, but I mean, this is all really difficult. It's really difficult stuff, because we don't actually want to think about what we do as a society with people who've done wrong. You know, like we don't. That's probably why we have so many people incarcerated in the U.S. Right? Like we have like a quarter of the world's incarcerated population, which is crazy, way disproportionate to the actual number of the population that we have. So yeah, I mean, I'm like, what? These are bigger questions. Like, what do we do with people when they've come out of prison? What do we do with people when they've done wrong? Like, I don't know.
Well, and she mentions in the first episode about how she kind of grew up thinking, and her family style was like, everything's always going to work out. Like, it seems like even now she kind of has, like you said, kind of that naivete, even after everything she's been through, like, well, yeah, it'll work out if I'm a women's major at Berkeley. Like, sure. And without really seeing maybe all sides of how everyone would interpret that.
And I'm not a psychologist, but like my read on that is that it's a coping mechanism, you know, like that is like, she is a doer. Like she stays doing things. Like even when she was on house arrest in the very beginning, she was still doing her like DOS protocols of like waking up at 5:30 and like she couldn't go out. She had an ankle monitor on. She couldn't go outside to work out. So instead she was like running laps. Like she created like an obstacle course laps within her parents' house, you know, like there's, and of course part of that was still, she was very deeply ingrained in this psychology of DOS, and she was still coming out of NXIVM as a cult. But like, I point to that to kind of point to the extent to which like she does things and like stays busy too, which I totally relate to. Like, I think anybody who's like a workaholic relates to. It's like, sometimes it's much easier to just do jobs, like do things and vacuum or like whatever it is, and like sit and look at your feelings because they're really uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it made sense when she said, you know, I want to do the podcast because people, when all these, you know, headlines came out, people were like, she's a pervert. And based on everything she's done, period, I know what she is. And she's like, my whole life, I wanted to be the best at everything. And when she even said, in high school, I was judged, you know, best whatever, like she still remembers these kind of external accolades, but having been labeled as like the worst, now kind of the idea of, well, I'm going to be judged either way. The truth is the truth. And I respected that she wants to do as much as she can for what she feels like. It sounded like the prison population was pretty welcoming and kind to her. You know, her first bunkie being like spreading the word about her and saying, you know, she's not part of the life, like just let her be. Her second bunkmate kind of becoming a best friend, you know, them making their vases together with their flowers and stuff. It sounds like she did not consider like, I'm too good to be in prison, you know, them calling her Piper when she comes in. Like she was kind of, I think, wide-eyed and scared when she went in, but I appreciated that she sort of took it on as almost like from a curiosity perspective. So it's a great question for the audience, is like, when someone has committed real harm, but was also manipulated, but was also sentenced by a judge and didn't appeal their sentence, took it on the nose, served her time, like, what do you expect this person to do? So, you know, is redemption even the right frame for her? Or is it just she's living her life and wanted to, you know, facilitate her story out there somewhere in her own way?
Yeah. I mean, it's, I feel like I start every answer for you by saying it's complicated.
It is, though. It's complicated.
It is complicated.
I'm a lawyer. Everything depends. It depends. Yeah.
Oh no, you're adding all those clauses at the end of sentences with like hereto notwithstanding. No, yeah. I mean, so with Allison, like she was already a public figure. She's been a public figure pretty much her entire life. I mean, she's been working from such a young age and was famous before NXIVM. And so was going to be famous after NXIVM, you know, because that's how fame works. And definitely her fame has like, and her beauty and her privilege and her race and so many other things have made her path into and out of prison smoother than it would be for a lot of people. But, you know, I think about, I've had some people sort of ask me like, oh, essentially, don't you feel bad for giving Allison a platform? And I think that's an interesting question, but I also can't help but look around at the current state of media and celebrity media, which Allison is a celebrity, whichever way. She could have started her own podcast. She could have gone on Call Her Daddy. Yeah. I know that sounds absurd, but it's like,
no, you're right.
She could have done a thing with softball interviews, and instead she let herself be perceived and examined and questioned and pushed by a real journalist, me. And she wanted to say it all aloud just once. That's what she said. So that, you know, also in the future, if people ask, she can just refer them back to this. So I found that really interesting. But there's, you know, I've also done stories with other people who've gone to prison and sat across from people describing incredibly violent crimes to me, crimes that they committed also within prison, with no remorse, with not anything, no hint of feeling across their face. And Allison is not that. Allison is deeply, at least in my experience, deeply remorseful. She feels, I think, as much as she can feel and still continue living, the pain that she's brought on other people. And again, some people are going to say she's a performer. She's just performing that to me. I did not feel that in my experience with her. And again, having sat on the other side with people who've done similar stuff with absolutely no feeling, I feel that she really is remorseful. And like you said, like she has done her time. Like, does that mean I expect her to like, should she then be, I don't know, making $5 million and doing like Skims brand deals? Like, I don't know, but like, I'm not the person that's, like I wouldn't be the person enabling that. Like, I actually can't, I'm sort of like, I wanted to investigate this for the story that it was and is.
Yeah.
And I still think it's worthwhile.
Oh, yeah.
No, definitely. I feel like listening to her in the times that she got caught up in emotion, it is an emotion that comes and overtakes her.
Yeah.
And if she's that good of an actress, she does not need a podcast. She'll win an Oscar next week. You know what I mean? Like it was truly
that's a great
genuine.
Point. She probably wouldn't have been on Smallville. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like no offense, but like I think she, if she was fine on the CW. She did great or whatever. But yeah, she was not like Meryl Streep before she went in. And what she is confessing to you and the moments that she has with you and those moments of truth, it at least played to me. I mean, I was walking next to this park we have in Dallas called White Rock Lake, and I had my headphones in, and there were times that I was like, oh, like, and I would cry with her too, because you do hear it almost like she's recalling it, but it was so recently that it, like, the emotion of it, she's maybe processed some of it, but it's like grief, right? It comes in waves, and it almost just like comes up and surprises her, even to where I was like, nobody is that good of a chess master to like feign the surprise and the catch of the voice and anybody who thinks that, I would challenge you to listen to the entire podcast end to end. And I think it sort of speaks for itself. But I think it would be easy if someone just heard, a quick clip or whatever to go, oh, she's just, she's acting. But she also didn't say, and now that I'm done with this podcast, I can't wait to have a television series. Like, it seems like she is done with acting and wants to pursue this art kind of therapy situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Especially the times when she's speaking about how it affected her own family. Mm-hmm. And when she's awaiting her sentencing and thinking about her mom and her brother and everything. I mean, that emotion sounds very real and raw and believable, that she is upset about what it is doing to them.
Mm-hmm. And her mother was just heartbroken throughout.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, like, so I spoke to Allison's mom for this podcast, and that was honestly one of the most upsetting things to me, because and Allison talks about it in the very first episode. She talks about being at her sentencing and her brother being behind her and her mom and all these people. And she basically says, she's crying. She's like, I'm not guilty, but like they are. And they're essentially being dragged through this. And that there's so many parts to this, because her mom, and it really like broke my heart too, like as a journalist, because her mom was sort of said to me, like, she feels an immense amount of guilt for like not having fought to get Allison out as hard as like India Oxenberg's mom did, for example. And I think that's the part where it's like, yeah, ultimately, like, this is also a person, like, with a family whose mom is there being like, how do I get my daughter back? Like, and I think, it's there's so much, there's so much guilt there from Allison's mom feeling like she didn't do enough and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's really tough. But also Allison wasn't the only one, like there were a lot of people in NXIVM.
Yeah.
Not so many who were as deep as she was, but there were a lot.
From your reporting and your speaking with Allison, what do you really think was the moment that she crossed kind of that psychological point of no return, where her mom probably wasn't going to be able to get her out at that point?
I mean, her mom said to me that Allison got involved was all in pretty quickly. And because I think she said something like Allison didn't dilly-dally on the edge for long. She like jumped in with both feet, which like is how Allison does everything. Again, she's like very whole, it's all or nothing, you know? And her mom basically said to me is like, she became very annoying. Like everything was Keith says, and Allison very quickly had the answer to everything that was Keith. So for me, I think there are several points, but really when Smallville ended and Allison moved up to Albany, I think that was a huge moment because so NXIVM was based in Albany in upstate New York. And prior to the time that Smallville ended, Allison had been living in Vancouver and then in New York. But when the show ended, it was suggested to her by whoever, probably Keith in some way, that she move up to Albany. And I think being there in the geographic proximity with Keith at his beck and call, where you could take walks with him all the time and have one-on-one time with him, I think that's when things really ratcheted up in terms of Allison's involvement with the group and psychological like point of no return. And then I think one of the other major flashpoints was like 2015, which was the formation of DOS. And there was no way, like that to me is when things really get crazy. And like if you think about the life cycle of a cult or something, like that was really sort of the apex that also led to its downfall, you know, because it was within DOS that there was the slave master dynamic, where Allison was a slave who reported up to Keith. She was one of the first 8 slaves within DOS. And then Keith essentially said at a certain point, okay, you guys now all need to become masters yourself and have slaves yourself. And that's when Allison had 4 slaves, recruited, I should say, 4 slaves, including India Oxenberg. And yeah, that's where the brandings happened. That's where this awful thing called the seduction assignment happened, where Allison essentially told her slaves, all in quotes, to it's like so strange to use this language, master slave, I just have to say, but it's what they use, so I'm using it. Sent them to go and seduce Keith. And then it was the brandings, from my perspective, that ultimately led to its downfall, because it was Sarah Edmondson's husband saw Sarah Edmondson's brand, and that kind of sparked in many ways the beginning of the end, thanks to the brave actions of Sarah Edmondson and a lot of other outspoken critics who risked a lot to get the word out and really put themselves on the line to help get other people out of NXIVM.
No, definitely. DOS was so insidious with the coercion, the starvation, the branding, the blackmail, the sexual exploitation, sleep deprivation. We really struggled, with that role of being both victim and enforcer. But I was telling my husband about this last night, and he said, you know what that makes me think of? The master-slave relationship is the hierarchy, the coercive hierarchy built on obedience, surveillance, fear, where the control flows downward, the loyalty flows upward. He said, have you ever seen the documentary American Pimp, where these sexual exploiters, quite literally happily calling themselves pimps, have what they call bottom bitches, who are these enforcers, who they're sort of treated as the pets. There's a handful of them, sometimes just one, sometimes multiple, and then recruit women, get the money from women. And really the idea that a man is manipulating them at the end of the day. And that I think if you were to ask, someone on the street, hey, this person was in this sexually exploitive, coercive situation, and it was one of the people in a documentary like that, they would look differently on that than hearing about Allison or Nikki or any of the others that are probably more affluent, wealthy, have more power. But I think there's a lot of parallels in that, and sexual exploitation is sexual exploitation. So what do you kind of think people have misunderstood about how Allison, someone like her, could end up in a role like that, where normally, you would see in the someone who is not perhaps famous or powerful, it makes sense that they might get wrapped up in that. But I think, is it just sort of that picking on those exploited personality traits, or there's a larger thing to it?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that documentary. It sounds really interesting. I think, that was one of my leading questions going into this, was like, how could somebody like Allison, somebody who ostensibly has it all, end up in a group like this and end up doing things like this, right? Like, she had money, she was pretty, she was attractive. she had a great career. She seemed to have it all. But I really think that it comes back down to those mental insecurities and psychological Achilles heels that I referred to that Keith was able to take advantage of, because we all have those, regardless of how rich or successful we are. And, you know, Allison was also an actor. She started, as I said, like acting really young. I think she describes something that I think a lot of people feel at a certain point in their life, when even if you have achieved all the markers of success, where you kind of look around and go like, is this it? Like, why do I not still feel happy? Why am I not happy? Like, I feel this kind of sense of ennui. And I think that's what led her to ultimately going to her first NXIVM workshop. I think there's another part too, that like a lot of people in entertainment, I think Allison, at least when she was first being recruited into NXIVM, I find her to be a very intelligent person and also an emotionally intelligent person, but she's not educated, at least not the time when she went to there. Like she got her GED early, and then she left home, moved out at 16. Mm-hmm. And so again, like she's smart and intelligent, but she's not educated. And I think I see that kind of again and again with a lot of people who find themselves in these groups where it's like you're less you're less able to parse that what these things that these leaders are saying is actually something that Aristotle said, or like this other thinker said, or maybe you're less used to critically thinking about like the other way. And I'm not saying that to like rag on Allison or other people, but like I think that we live in a pretty anti-intellectual time when like higher education in general is like denigrated and looked down on. But I'm like, I don't know. I still think it's important to learn stuff, at least personally. Yeah. Like maybe it can ward you off to somebody telling you, hey, I'm a fucking genius because I'm saying this thing that low-key Plato said. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. And twisting it and taking
or
credit.
Even other actual cult leaders, you know,
yes.
We've seen that.
You're like, oh yeah, I'm not really familiar with Jonestown. It's like, well, there's a lot of similarities between this and that.
Yeah.
So
history, let's look it up. Let's read a book. Let's crack a book open.
Yeah.
And I think that's
the street smarts weren't there either, really.
Yeah. No, I mean that too. I mean, and I'm sort of presenting this kind of jokingly, but I do think there's something else also with Allison, which is that like, and I already spoke to, I feel that her sort of naivete, but she talks about in the podcast what she describes as having experienced like things that happened sexually to her when she was younger, both on set and offset in a more personal realm, that were not okay. And I think oftentimes when things like that happen to children, it can really warp your understanding of like normalcy or what is normal behavior or what is appropriate behavior. You can in turn be very sexually explicit, but also naive in quick succession, often with no time in between, and childlike in some ways, but also wise beyond your years in some ways. And that's very common among child actors, is like having both of those qualities among child actors. Like people always say famous people are kind of frozen at the age that they got famous, right? That's like the sort of phrase. And part of me thinks that's in some ways true with Allison. And then a darker undercurrent of, when sexually inappropriate things happen to children, it often like in some ways can freeze them.
It freezes them too. Yeah.
At that age.
I don't think it's an excuse at all, but I do appreciate all of the backstory on onset things that happened to her, her prior relationships, how those all interacted. And I think it's not presented in a way to excuse what she did, but listening to it and having already studied NXIVM and not coming to this, this is not my first experience with this group. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like given that experience, that makes sense why she reacted that way later with Keith.
Context.
Yeah, I was like, at no point did I think, oh, well, they're just trying to sweep everything under the rug. To me, it was like the reporting is incomplete without it. And it was just up until this point, impossible for any of us to have known this before.
Yeah.
It just like makes a lot of, it almost makes too much sense. Like I was almost like, but I mean,
she was ripe for the picking.
Yeah, it is. It is what it is. It's like, it's unfortunate, but yeah.
Yeah. As you were going through some new facts that came out, was there anything that was difficult to corroborate or anything that was particularly, I mean, this is already a shocking, mind-blowing case, but anything that came out in your reporting that you had not seen that totally, shocked you from prior coverage?
I mean, I did not know we knew a lot about the calorie restriction, but I did not know where Allison was on a 500 calorie a day diet for 3 years as part of her time in DOS. I did not know about the fact that she wore a salacious as punishment. So a salacious was a sort of belt with spikes on the inside that Allison says she would wear as punishment if she overate. Again, her words. And so if she, quote, overate, those spikes would dig in to her stomach. And that to me was horrifying, honestly, because like, it's so upsetting because it's self-harm and it's being presented as self-growth. And also in a religious context, like it's taking this religious practice of like burlap, were nuns or monks or whatever wearing burlap sacks, or even like self-flagellation or something like that. It's taking that and using that framework to pretend that this is all spiritual work when it's self-harm and control. Because Keith was benefiting from these women being underfed and underslept 100%. And deliriously hungry for years. You're easier to control when you're in that state. And it's like, I know how I feel if I haven't slept enough. I'm like kooky.
Yeah.
So imagine that
you get hangry and you're like, I'd do anything for a burrito
for
right
3
now.
years.
I mean, he's got like, he's got them all in the palm of his hand right where he wants them, because he is both their abuser, but their savior when he wants to be.
Yes,
Having to meditate on his image in the morning.
Gross.
I mean, sickening.
Vomit.
Yeah, meditating
Seriously.
on his goodness. I think I say this in the podcast, but like that is one of the things that Allison told me she had to do as part of her like dedication and devotion to Keith as a master, was she had to meditate on his goodness every single day. And that was one of the things that really disturbed me the most. Like I meditate. I do. It's part of my spiritual practice, but hearing that, like the day that she told me that, I came home and I tried to meditate before bed, as I usually do. And like Keith's face kept popping into my head. And I was just like, oh, and that was just, that's just
when you schlub.
When I was listening to that, I was walking at the lake and you said that and you're like, his face came in my head and his face came in my head. And I really did have to, because I meditate as well. I had to take a moment and just be like, psh, like, get out of here. And I thought, this is because I've listened to, I was like binging through the series, but I was like, I don't know this person. I've never met him. If I had to sit there and go, get out of my head, how hard must it be if you are living with him, working with him every day? That's become your career. And to hear her
having
financially.
A sexual relationship.
Oh, the financial
the sexual
stuff,
relationship, but it was the sexual relationship through therapy. So now your therapy is also wound in, and her finances were all gone, at some point.
Yeah. I mean,
it was like Scientology.
Yeah. I mean, it's a controlling relationship. It's that's not even like a strong enough phrase for it. You know what I mean?
No,
but
it's prison,
again, like, and like we're saying all this stuff and it's like, it doesn't excuse any of the behavior, but it helps you understand how it got there. And like, I have to say, like, not that this is about me, but as a journalist, like even just working on this story and hearing the stuff secondhand, like it's disturbed me. Like I did the bulk of these interviews over 2 days with Vanessa Gregoriadis and with Allison Mack. And after that first day of interviews, I mean, I was driving home just like wrecked. Like I went to heat up my Christmas dinner. It was the day after Christmas that we did the first day of interviews. I went to heat up my Christmas. I'd hosted Christmas on Christmas Day and then went to my husband was like, "You are crazy for this."
That's a real journalist, though. You're like, I got to get the story, though. It's happening.
But I came home. But it made sense. It's like this liminal time between Christmas and New Year. It's a good time for reflection, I think. I came home and I was heating up my leftovers and I looked at my plate and I went, it's probably more than 500 calories, which is like, I'm not a person that thinks about calories. Like I've done a lot of work on ED stuff. I'm like not there. And it's like, that was Keith's voice, even in that I had been hearing secondhand from Allison, now secondhand in my brain. And then I tried to meditate and I saw his face. And even like I tried to go to sleep that night and I was just, really disturbed by it. I don't know another way to say it. I had to I moved into this spare room and took the dog to sleep with me, which I don't do because I just I don't know. Yeah. I needed my dog for protection or something.
Yeah.
Like it's
Did
really,
you find that you had to kind of create guardrails or boundaries for yourself, like mental practices, so it didn't seep into you?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the mental guardrails were to just sort of get through the bulk of the writing as sort of fluidly and quickly as possible. Because this was a story that I lived with for a long time, but I essentially tried to, because it took a long time between meeting Allison and doing the interview for it to all come together kind of thing. It was like a year and a half. But yeah, I mean, I've also done this isn't my first time doing a fucked up story.
Yeah.
So but yes, I mean, so I have good self-care practices of go for a walk, meditate, talk about it in therapy, talk about all the things. Yeah, I definitely did have to employ part of that. And again, I guess it sounds funny. It feels funny for me to be talking about this because it's really not about, I don't know. It just feels weird to be boo-hoo, it was hard for me. That's not, but I don't know. I think it is kind of important to note because it's it's real. This is how powerful this stuff is and how controlling and manipulative this guy was, that even hearing about it secondhand, bothers you. Even as a seasoned journalist, it still sticks with you. The story sticks with you. And I think that speaks to the depth of control Keith had. But I mean, it's why we're even talking about it now. There is something about NXIVM, and I say this in the final episode, but I really think that NXIVM is the Manson family of our time. Oh, yeah. Just because of the depth of control that he had over these women, which again is another, the Manson murders were carried out mostly by women. Most of his followers were women. And he had these women doing his worst bidding to an extremely violent conclusion. And NXIVM did not end in murders, but I've often wondered, what if they hid out in Mexico and took up guns? And there was violent shit that happened in NXIVM. The brandings are violent. The sexual assault is violent.
Oh yeah.
And we didn't not know each beat of control that Charles Manson was enacting on those women. I think there was a lot of drugs from what I understand, for sure. A lot of sex too. But yeah, so to be able to understand each part of this puzzle, I thought was critical. And I think we'll be living with this story for a long time.
Yeah.
It's so critical. Thank you for covering her perspective of it, because we see so many of these now cults online. We have political cults, you have wellness cults, where there's so many funnels where I think people can get sucked into something. And I like that she pointed out, when she was in prison talking to other women who said, oh, I was here because I was the getaway driver for this guy. I was the bag woman for this drug dealer. And it was a ton of them had these relationships that it was a man is this fulcrum, and it moves in a way that wrecks a ton of lives, some of whom are male lives, but most of whom are women. And I just keep coming back to Twin Flames universe that we've covered on here that involves being the panacea. You're lonely, we will help you. So kind of how do you think Allison's part particularly, but overall the NXIVM story kind of helps us understand modern architecture in these cult movements, whether kind of formal or informal?
I mean, I think Allison's story helps us understand how somebody can be manipulated and their weaknesses taken advantage of to the extent that they then are perfectly primed to commit crimes themselves, And I also think it helps us understand that in cults, yes, there is a cult leader, but there's also a lot of other people who are complicit, but who are complicit and victims themselves sometimes. And the point at which victim turns into perpetrator is a difficult one to pinpoint, and that's for judge and juries. But yeah, I mean, I think it's I also think it at least for me, it urges me to sort of think about the ways in which we are complicit just by allowing things to occur in our daily lives. You know, like it feels so like pat for me to say, but, you know, if you're just standing by and not doing anything to stop it, like you're part of the problem in
There's
a lot of
complicity
ways.
in that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and so I think there's so Allison went one step further. She didn't just stand by. She also enacted real harm herself. But there were plenty of people in NXIVM who did just stand by, or who actively recruited or did other things that didn't serve time or weren't brought up on trial. And so I don't know. There's just lots of other parts to it. And I think it helps us understand how many people are guilty within cults in different ways, I guess.
Yeah. After spending so much time with Allison, is there still a question or questions that keep you up at night?
If I'm being completely honest, like the things that keep me, I hope that her victims are healing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that I really think about and hope for. Nothing keeps me up at night, but like, the one part of this that still scares me, if I'm being completely honest, is Keith. You know, like he's in prison for, I think his sentence is 120 years. He's in Tucson, Arizona. And it's very difficult for me because I understand that the United Nations has said that solitary confinement is a form of torture. But I think about Keith being in Gen Pop, and I think about how manipulative he is and what he could be doing and how he could be controlling people even from within prison. And that's worrying to me, you know, I'm sure it's fine, but I just am like, I don't know.
That's a good point, though.
It's like, it's scary, and it's, you know, maybe he'll become feeble. It's funny. I interviewed somebody who used to be in the same prison as Charles Manson. And this was when Manson was like 80 something at this point. He was just like a crazy old guy in the yard. But he said, you know, you would see Manson just walk by and everyone kind of just gave him a nod. Like it was still Manson, you know, people still revered him. Nobody fucked with him because he was Charles Manson, even though he was an old guy. And I am sort of like, yeah, like what's that going to be like for Keith?
Is that going to be Ranieri's legacy as well?
Yeah. And then, you know, I also think about the people who still believe he did nothing wrong. Yeah. Because even though NXIVM as an organization has utterly crumbled, there are a handful, I don't know how many, but there are still a couple people that believe that Keith has done nothing wrong, and that he.
What are they? The NXIVM 5, or they were talked about on the series, right? It's like a handful. It's
a couple people, and they feel that there were real flaws in the government's case, and that it'll be overturned, and XYZ, which, you know, misses the forest from the trees. Really, I mean, not to say that it's not important if there were flaws in the case, but like we're missing the point.
There are not, but
there could have been flaws, but
no,
the overwhelming
evidence
is way more than the flaws.
Well, it was wild to me that his argument was like, yes, we had this sexual coercion, but there wasn't money. And it's like, there doesn't have to be
or
money.
Even
like
that
his
it wasn't
whole
underage. And then it's like part of the core argument is I think that it's like one of the, whatever. It's like, oh, she was 16, not 15. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Still wrong. Yeah,
we're splitting hairs on this. Like so anyway, so that's what I mean. It's missing the forest from the trees.
Well, and those women sound like they aren't completely deprogrammed, and they're still have a foot in the door. Do you? And you've been very honest with us, which I appreciate. Do you honestly believe that Allison is completely deprogrammed?
What do you mean by that? Because if you mean, has she completely renounced Keith? Yes, I think that is true. Has she completely done away and made her mind whole in the way that NXIVM is no longer a part of it? Probably no. because it's deprogramming is such a long process, and it's work, you know, like it's mental work. And I think like even in my conversations with her, you know, she kind of said like there would be, and this is part of what made me trust her, because there would be things where I'd say something and she'd be like, oh, my gut reaction, like the NXIVM voice is kicking in and saying, no, that wasn't what we were doing. But then like real me, present me is saying like, no, that yes, that you're right, blah, blah, blah. And it's like that I can't blame her for that. Like it takes a long time to rejigger your thinking. Like that takes a long, long time. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that is most interesting to me about where Allison is now. And that is that she's married to somebody who is a former neo-Nazi. So she's married to somebody else who is a convicted felon, like went to prison, and also deprogrammed from essentially a high control group. Like the neo-Nazi movement is a high control group in some ways. And so he understands how difficult it is to get out of that thinking, and how difficult it is, how much of a process it is. Even if you're like, I think emotionally she's like fully done out, hates Keith, et cetera, et cetera. But your mind takes so long to reform and shape and make all those mixing metaphors, but you know what I mean. Just
no,
make it
where
all,
it's not the first thought you have isn't
the
through the lens of NXIVM. Yeah, and you can let your own voice speak, but it's that catching yourself. Yeah.
And I think
there's something so beautiful about their marriage. Yeah. Because they have that shared history that who else is going to understand what it's like to have been in a high control group, but someone else in a high control group.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she talks about it with, you know, when I met them, they like told me this first story, and then I had them both tell me it again on the record. But one of their very first fights, I think their very first fight was over a donut, because Frank came home and he had a donut, and I think he'd already had one. And he'd previously said to Allison, you know, I'm trying to eat less sugar, blah, 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 something like that. I'm trying to watch what I eat, blah, blah, blah. And so when Allison saw him with the donut, she like flipped out and was like, what are you doing with this donut? And he was like, it's a donut. And she was like, no, it's not. And in her, he's like, it's just a donut. And she's like, no, it's not. Because in her brain, she's seeing what the donut represents and what it would have represented in DOS, which was, this is 500 calories. This is disrespect. This is not taking your health seriously. This is not keeping your commitments. This is failure on a personal level, blah, 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 blah. And her husband was just like, this isn't a relapse. Like, this isn't drugs. It's a fucking jelly donut.
Yeah.
I'm going to eat it. You can't tell me what to eat, basically. And she had to really sit with like, why the fuck did I freak out over a jelly donut? Like, it's just a jelly donut. And since then, you know, she reflected on it extensively. They worked through it, whatever. I mean, they got a picture of a jelly donut now in their apartment, they told me, which I was like, right, like that, you know.
It's a good reminder of like,
sometimes
it's never
just
about the jelly donut.
Exactly.
There's always way more layers to it than that.
I mean, and it's like, you know, it's a funny little story, because of course, any of us in relationships, like we all have those, you all have those fights over a thing that isn't about the thing.
Sure.
But I think I find that so representative for just where she's at in terms of still coming out of DOS, you know, and still coming out of NXIVM and Keith's brain control, and really understanding that it is a process, and she'll probably be unraveling it for the rest of her life.
It kind of seeps out of you at unexpected moments, I bet, too. What do you ultimately hope listeners walk away questioning about themselves after hearing this series?
Oh boy, that's a big question. You know, I hope listeners walk away with, this sounds so lofty now, I feel like I'm going to sound silly, but just a little more compassion for themselves and for other people, you know, like I think a little more understanding that possibly we all will cause harm at a certain point, like not to the extent that Allison does, for sure. You know, most likely, hopefully not to a criminal extent, but like we're probably all gonna hurt someone. And whether we break their heart, whether we say something mean to our kid that we don't remember, but then they hold against us for 20 years, or whatever it is. And really trying to accept that and face that, and obviously try to prevent it. But if you do hurt somebody or cause harm, like, try to apologize, try to really be remorseful, try to really make up for the wrong that you've done. That's what I hope people take from it. But yeah, just also an understanding that we all have, I think, a lot of this all within us, you know?
Yeah.
Even if we don't want to think that we do, I think that we do.
Yeah. We're all human, and we're all connected in way more ways than we think.
And that is the good and the bad, you know? It's all of it.
We talk a lot about the power of storytelling on our show, and how somebody hearing her story now, this will resonate with them and perhaps give them more compassion over, I shouldn't be so judgmental of people that fall into these cults, because it's a lot more complicated than I thought.
Yeah.
And, you know, walk away with a better understanding and more compassion. That's what we always strive for in our show. So I don't think it's corny at all that's what you hope for.
No, thank you. And I guess the other thing I want to say is, like, this is a little out there, but like, we are in such a time where so much of our thinking is moderated by algorithms, where things are either it's on or off. It's the most extreme perspective is the one that is rewarded socially on these algorithms, and that is extreme positive or extreme negative. And I just like really resent that and push against that from a storytelling perspective, because that's just not life. Like, that's not reality. Like, it's gray area. There is nuance, and we know this because we live life. And I think it's very important to bring some of that back when we are in a way where so much of our stuff is modulated through these timelines and through these algorithms that promote most extreme views. And also, like, culturally, that's also where we're at, so divided. So I don't know. Anyway, that's my little soapbox, and I'll get off it now.
I love it. No, I love it. Tell us what you're working on next.
Oh, goodness. I'm working on taking a really big vacation.
Good for you. Good for you.
You deserve it.
And then, yes. And then I will have, I have my weekly podcast, a show called Infamous, that I co-host with Vanessa Gregoriadis. It's all about different scandals and different fun topics that we're talking about at dinner parties lately. And we speak to a lot of journalists and talk about how they got those stories on that show. And then, more to come in the future. But if people want to follow me, they can find me on Instagram at natrobe. That's NATROBE. And go listen to Allison After NXIVM, wherever you get podcasts.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you so much for joining us today. You brought so much depth and compassion to this story, and that's what we try to do on the show as well. So we are honored to have you, and honored to have listened to one of the most thoughtful, nuanced explorations of one of the largest cult cases probably of our generation. So everybody, Allison,
thank you.
Well, thank you. Allison After NXIVM is out now. Go listen to all 7 episodes on CBC's Uncover feed. You can listen on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We put a link in the show notes, so it'll be real easy, and check it out. Support Natalie's incredible reporting, Infamous with Vanessa Gregoriadis, and let us know your thoughts in the comments, because we want to get out of those algorithms where it's either all good or all bad, and it depends, right? So thank you for letting us explore the gray area with you today.
Thank you so much. This has been a delight to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.